Hi, I'm Rosela Mosing. I'm a somatic-based whole life leadership and presence coach.
And I'm Ellen Palmer. I'm a regenerative leadership coach and strategic advisor for purpose-driven women. We're coaches.
And also friends. Welcome to the Presence Hour.
We have cleared this hour to become present to what is and invite you to join us in a lively conversation. We'll explore what is coming up for us and illustrate how cultivating presence can help us gain new insights, perspectives, and ways forward. Let's come together and take the mystery out of presence by getting ourselves there now.
Take a deep breath into your heart, and from here, we'll begin.
Here we are at another episode of the Presence Hour. I invite everyone to join us right now in the present moment and take a deep breath. And come into the now. Together with us, Rosela and I are here. It's so good to see you, Rosela.
It's really good to be with you, Ellen.
Yeah. So today, everyone, we have a specific topic that we're talking about coming into this, that Rosela recently had a loved pet, a loved one, a pet, go across the rainbow bridge. That's how we say it in my family, is that they travel across the rainbow bridge. And so today we wanted to open up some space to talk about grief and how to sit with grief and be with grief and what do you do with it? Because, you know, we're living human beings and we are all going to experience grief at some time. So I just want to say first, Rosela, thank you for bringing your vulnerability and in your experience into this conversation, so we can all be here to support you. I know I am here to support you, and to explore this topic with you. So I'm wondering if we should start with like a mood check, like we usually do. Do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you for that, Ellen. I am noticing it's interesting. Of course, there's sadness. There's sadness that is constantly in and out. And I'm noticing that being here with you, I also feel comfort and it opens my heart even more, which feels really good, but also allows the sadness to really be felt more.
Yeah.
So I will just notice that brings up more tenderness and a more likelihood that I will express some emotion that might be uncomfortable for me and for listeners. And I really want to be present with what is and allow what's here to be here. And so I don't expect that I'll become dysregulated in this conversation, but I might express some difficult emotion. And so I just want to welcome those things and model that capacity in our conversation as much as is possible for me. So that was a lot of talking. That was more than just a mood check. So I'd love to hear how you're coming into this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And we'll get right back to that in a minute after the mood check, because I think it's just so rich in the modeling and, dealing with our lives, in all of it, all parts of it. So my mood coming in today, so I think this is maybe the best way to describe it. Oftentimes I don't have a word, but I have a description. So today, a lot of times in life, we always kind of have like things going on. So we're thinking about the next thing or this, or there's a bunch of kind of unresolved loose ends that, oh yeah, we have to get to that. We got to register for that, or we got to close up that or finish that scheduling thing. And there's always kind of those things that are out there. Mm-hmm. And for right now, today in this, like I was thinking about just the 3 hours of my morning at work or 4 hours of my morning at work, I feel like I'm in a place where like things are kind of like all tied up, like everything. So I just feel this sense of peace in the sense of like, it's kind of like the eye in the storm kind of thing, where like all of a sudden there's like silence and everything is quiet and still. Knowing, and I'm just like, now that I can see those moments, I'm knowing how to like become present and appreciate them and be like, oh, here's one of those moments. It could last 5 minutes. It could last 2 hours. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how long it'll last, but just to be with it, that I feel like it is just this point of stillness where I feel like I definitely have other things to do. Like, I'm not saying that, but I feel that sense of stillness and resolve in the moment and in my day today. And I just thought, what perfect timing for this conversation, that I just really, my hopes for this is that I'm just really present here with you, and with this topic, for like, and very curious to see what arises.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting that you described your entrance with this specific language of stillness and resolve, because I noticed that that's something that I've been really profoundly experiencing in this time, is this deep stillness, this invitation into it, this incapacity to fight it. And for me, it's more stillness and acceptance that I'm sitting in or moving through, because there's just not, I guess there are choices. And so there's been a lot of observation, a lot of feeling, a lot of thinking about how do you grieve? And that's, I guess, one of the first things is like, after feeling the profound, well, let me step back. I'll just say I'm noticing, so I have, my partner and I are both going through this grief together. And so I'm observing both myself in the grief and the differences in how we have led up to this moment and how we're processing now, which is interesting. But I'll say for me, I've really been grieving this loss for the last year. We've seen it coming.
Yeah.
And I've been actively grieving for the last year.
Yeah.
And I think that's been helpful. And I was still surprised by some of the things that were really, really hard. I'm still being surprised by the places it feels less hard than I thought it would. Which then I'm noticing my capacity to, so it's interesting. I'm noticing my capacity to move in and out as I observe, as I'm, relying on these skills of presence, mindful awareness, and observation that I've really been practicing over the last 3 years consistently, with things that have been hard in different ways or far less hard, and recognizing how I'm really using those skills right now to help me navigate being able to not only sit with and manage my own grief, but to be able to go back to work and coach other people. And some of them dealing specifically with grief, and loss of loved ones. And so being able to be present enough, fully present with them and what's happening with them, is not something I would have been able to do in the past. And so I'm seeing the difference in how I'm processing now, which, again, I feel like is a lot of talking.
No, I think, that's, before we dive into, I know perhaps, there's lots of different ways we could go or begin, but, you were talking about the skills that you've acquired to help you and how this is possibly helping you versus if this happened 3 years ago, and how you've been processing grief over time, and there's still surprises. Like, I heard a bunch of nuggets, but I'm wondering for our listeners, if you wanted to, if you felt comfortable sharing what actually happened. So then, when I'm like I'm a visual listener as well as like an auditory listener, and to have that visual of like, what is the experience that you went through specifically?
Yeah, I'll do my best, and I'll rely on you to. I'll rely on you to
just to be like, what are we talking about?
So for reference, this was my beloved French bulldog Claire, who came into my life when she was 11 weeks old and passed almost a month to the day after her 16th birthday. And so about a year ago, we got a diagnosis that we thought was terminal. There was a blockage in her bladder that could or could not be cancer, but it was very near her urethra entrance. And so we thought at some point that might become disastrous. She's had multiple other health things in the last year that we have thought might be the end. And so it's been a constant, in and out of hypervigilance of where are we on the timeline. And there have been, other factors that we've talked about in other episodes, so I won't get into those. But, we've been watching the slow and then sudden decline. And last week, it became really clear. Like, I had a conversation with her. I know this sounds silly, but, I talked to her. And when I very first brought her home, I whispered in her ear and told her how much I love her. And she better live to be a very old lady, at least 15 years, because average lifespan for a French bulldog, just for reference, is about 12 years.
Okay.
And so I said, you better live to be a very old lady, at least 15 years. And I thought that was unreasonable and beyond, possible. Yeah. And I just kept, asking her for that. Mm-hmm. And so as we approached her 15th birthday, I thought, oh man, it's looking iffy. I don't know if we're going to make it. And so in the last week, it was still uncertain. I knew she was uncomfortable, but it didn't seem dire. And she had been uncomfortable, but not dire for some time. It was being managed. And in the last week, I had started to talk to her and tell her, because I wanted her to know I love her and I always want her here. Mm-hmm. And I want her to feel free to leave when she's ready. And so I told her in those last days, I think it was Monday of last week, I had a conversation with her and just told her that I said, I love you so much. And I'm okay. When you're ready to go, I want you to feel free to leave. And if you need help with that, I want to help and support you, but I really need you to make it really clear. Yeah. And the next day, it became clear. And so we had decided we really didn't want her to have to go to the vet's office. She really had anxiety there. It was very stressful for her. So we had planned ahead to hopefully have someone come to the house. And so I mentioned on Tuesday to my partner, like, hey, I think it's time. I think she's telling us. And, he had been back and forth. We're still in the process of helping manage his mom's health and stuff. And so he, in his problem-solving, reassuring way was like, well, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's just, she's had a bad day over the last year. Mm-hmm. And then the next day she's back to bouncing around a little bit and feeling like herself. And so we said, okay, let's see how tomorrow goes. Yeah. And then Wednesday seemed the same. And by Wednesday, like mid-morning, he was like, you're right, it's time. And so then I felt, okay, he sees it. He's confirming. So now I can at least feel comfortable and confident that it's the right time. Mm-hmm. And initially I had thought, let's plan it for the weekend because I've got a work week to get through. Like, my mind is trying to manage the whole process. Yeah. So let's plan it for the weekend, completely forgetting he had weekend obligations with his mother. And I would have a following week of work to be going into, and how much time would that give me to grieve? And so contrary to my plan, the vet that we had planned to have come out was only available for Friday morning or afternoon, Friday afternoon. And so we agreed because we couldn't imagine going later. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, okay, well, I'll just make that work. And then I had several clients I had already not super packed days, but, fairly scheduled days on Thursday and Friday. And all but 2 of my clients canceled or rescheduled, and for each day. And so then I thought, well, I've only got 2 clients on each day. I think I might, I for sure knew I needed to cancel Friday. I needed to be with her, but I was thinking maybe I can just see my couple clients on Thursday. Mm-hmm. And then I realized one's at the beginning, one's at the end. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. I want to be with her. And so I canceled those clients. And And it felt okay because it was just a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent the whole day Thursday with her, which was really, Glennon Doyle, for those of you that are familiar, she uses this word brutiful, the combination of brutal and beautiful.
Oh, wow. I like that.
And I feel like that's what it was, because by this point she was like having some trouble standing, and like her legs would just kind of splay out as she tried to stand. So it was clear she was uncomfortable. She was on pain medication. We were managing it, but it was clear that she was getting ready to really let go. And so we spent the whole day, and it was really uncomfortable to be with her discomfort, and really wonderful to get to spend a whole day kind of just being with her. And like, we took her to the beach that evening. We went for a drive around the car where she just laid on my lap. Her favorite place in the world is to be laying on me. And she hasn't been able to do that comfortably, consistently for the last year. Mm-hmm. And so she did that. She just laid on my lap while we were driving around and went to sleep. And so it was nice. It was hard to say goodnight and go to bed that night. And I had planned to get up early, and I knew I probably wouldn't sleep well, but I just woke up at 5:00 the next morning and thought, I'm going to get up. She won't be awake yet, but I'm going to get up. So I came down and sat with her, and she woke up earlier than normal too, at about 6:30. And I took her out, and we must have walked around our property 3 or 4 times for lengthy little walks, which again, she hasn't done in a while. And the weather was perfect. It was sunny and cool and comfortable for her. And, like, there were just lots of little moments where I felt like she could feel. There was one tiny moment where there's a normal path we walk around, and there's a patch that she doesn't usually like to go to, but I sometimes do. And there's a tree there. And one of my favorite things we used to do was go to park, and she would lay on my belly, and I would just look up through the leaves of the tree at the sun. So there's this big tree in this one patch of land near where we walk that she doesn't usually like to go to, but I kind of do. And I looked at it. We had walked kind of near there, and I looked at it, and I just thought, I'm remembering that memory, and that would be nice to go look under the tree with her. And she just stopped and started making a beeline towards that patch of grass, and then stopped halfway across the parking lot and just stood there for a minute. And I thought, we're going to turn and go back. And then she kept going and walked straight over to that exact spot and so I thought, yeah, she's with me. She feels this. So I just picked her up and snuggled her for a minute and looked at the sun through the leaves. And, we came back and we spent some time, again, the 3 of us together as a little family. And I noticed feeling the heaviness of, it's so close, and I almost wish I hadn't waited so long. It feels heavy to keep waiting. We know the end is moments or hours away, and we just have to wait and watch her struggle. Yeah. And that was hard. And I was noticing how grateful I was for the way that it was all unfolding, and that we did have the time that we had. And we, of course, spoiled her and gave her, she had grilled salmon and bacon for breakfast. She had an ice cream sundae, including chocolate ice cream. And so it was just little moments with her. And then I noticed feeling the pressure of, like, I feel like there's a countdown, like noticing how I was noticing the time in the clock. And 10 minutes before the vet was scheduled to arrive, like, I just picked her up, and I just was kind of holding her in a way to take the pressure off her joints from standing, like not snuggle her in because I knew that wasn't comfortable, but just give her that support. And she really just relaxed into me in a way that she hadn't been. And we just stayed that way for those last 10 minutes until the vet arrived. And then, we talked through what we needed to talk through. And I held her. Like, she had this way of wanting to be held almost like a baby. Like, I just cradled her into my chest to get the first sedation shot. And that was a difficult moment because there's a little pinch. They feel the pinch of the shot before the relaxation happened. And I could see almost like it felt like a look of betrayal. Like, oh, what are you? I've never held her when she's getting a shot before. It's always the vet's. And then it looked like panic or discomfort with the sensation, perhaps, that was happening as those muscle relaxants and painkillers started to take over. And that part was hard.
Yeah.
And then she just relaxed in. And like her breathing became deeper and like more steady. And she just relaxed in and snuggled in the way she had for years and years. And just laid on my chest. And then we sat on the sofa and got relaxed and comfortable. And I could feel the weight of her and the heat of her. And after a moment, then the next step, the vet puts an IV line into her leg where they will then feed the stronger muscle relaxer that will stop her heart. And so she put that IV line in, and, Claire's just there, sleeping, breathing, comfortable. And then she starts to put the stronger drug. And I'm watching the syringe depress and the medication go into her system. And just before the very end, I felt and heard her just stop breathing. It wasn't like a big last breath. She just stopped. And I think I expected to feel her go. I expected to feel somatically in my nervous system her absence. And I didn't. And that was hard. Like, I knew the precise moment she left, but I didn't feel it. And I just let myself really weep. And then she gave us a few moments to just be with Claire. And this was the most unexpected part, was that when she came back, she had this cozy dog bed and blanket for us to place Claire in, for her to carry her out. And she wrapped her up so gently. But taking Claire off my body and putting her in that bed and watching this really wonderful, warm, gentle stranger walk out of my home with my dog, in the moment that it felt like she needed me the most. That was rough. And so I noticed that I can intellectually say, I know she's not in there. And it's helpful to come back to that. But I can also recognize that my nervous system, my body, my soma was just feeling that familiar feeling of us, of our bond, of our life together. And I expected that part to feel different in that last moment. And then about an hour later, we went for a walk, the two of us, in a park that is a favorite park that we have taken her to, but it's not a dog park. And so usually it's just us there. And this is going to sound maybe kind of silly. I feel silly saying it out loud. But I'm saying it because I'm recognizing, in addition to orienting to presence, I've been not initially consciously, but in the process orienting to some of my strengths that I used to not think of as strengths. So I've done the VIA strengths and the Clifton Strengths Finder. And so in Clifton, my top strength is connectedness. And in VIA, it's love. And I always think, those are lame. How does that help me get ahead in this world? How do I achieve anything with those? And what I'm coming to realize is they help me operate in my life better, which helps me get to where I want to go in other ways. But so in this moment, what was helpful was that, so we get to the park, and it's a park that has a lot of birds, but not a lot of crows very often, sometimes. And as soon as we got out of the car and started down the path, one single crow, it's usually not just one single crow flew overhead and seemed to be following us for a minute and just did 3 or 4 caws that sounded a little like her dog barks. And my partner was like, I think that's Claire. And it felt nice. And I thought, yeah, that kind of sounds nice. But then the logical part of my brain sort of dismissed it and said, yeah, that feels nice. And maybe it's just a crow. And as we did the loop that the park has and came to the end, we could have drifted off to the right to go back to our car, or we could have done a little bit extra loop to go around the backside to come back to our car. And we decided, let's do that. And as we approached, there was a little gray lump on the ground that looked like a bird. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting that there's a bird sitting in the middle of the path? And then as we got closer, it didn't move. And I thought, is that a bird? Because why is it not moving? And then we got closer and I saw, not only is it a bird, it's a blue jay fledgling. And I have a special I know a lot of people probably do because they're so striking and beautiful, but I have a special attachment to blue jays and they have special meaning for me. And I've never seen a blue jay fledgling before. And so it just sat there directly in front of me on the path. I got so close to it that I thought it was injured or couldn't fly. And I went to reach for it to see if it was okay. And it wasn't until I actually reached out for it that it flew away. And it flew not up into a tree, but the ground near a tree. And so you'd think I could just still see it, but no, it just seemed to disappear. And so that was one of those things where I felt like, well, okay, maybe that's Claire. Maybe that's her like saying, I'm okay, I'm free. And then the last thing that kind of this thing of connectedness or seeing connections and things that maybe are or aren't, but help me to navigate and see greater possibility and opportunity for joy in my life, was that for the last several years, Claire's vision has been pretty bad. And so we have never turned off our kitchen or living room light because that's where she sleeps and she needs, in case she wakes up in the night, we want her to be able to see. And so just for several years, they've just never been turned off. And so that night when we were going to bed, I shut the kitchen light off. And then I had this moment of, I had forgotten something. So I'm sort of at that age where I'm in that sort of perimenopausal place and I'm having occasional hot flashes, super fun. And I have been taking ice packs to bed with me so that in case I have one, I have that. And I thought, oh, dang it, I forgot my ice. And then there was this part of my brain that was like, oh, I really like the symbolism of turning off the light and saying goodnight and just going straight up to bed. And now I'm going to ruin it by having to turn the light back on and dang it. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll just get my ice in the dark. It's fine. And it'll still. And then my partner reached and turned the light back on. And I was like, oh, and it didn't turn on.
Wow.
Like it burned out in that second that I turned it off.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, Claire, I see you. I see that you're free and that you're saying goodbye. And so it's been a lot of little moments like that I feel again I'm present to notice that they're happening and that what my experience of it is, I recognize that I'm making some meaning that may or may not be there. And I'm using my inherent inborn strengths to help me sort of navigate, as well as noticing, like doing the things like noticing what does the sadness feel like, what are the thoughts that are coming up? So that's another thing is as my partner and I are grieving together, noticing the gifts. There's been so many gifts and lessons, but orienting to that. And one of the gifts is that we've been struggling with feeling a little disconnected as we've been trying to manage Claire and her health in this end of life process and his mom needing care where one or both of us has had to be at her house every day for the last 3 months. And so we've been really felt torn apart. And so noticing that in this shared grief, we're finding deeper connection and even ability to connect in new ways. So like noticing that because he's also grieving, it's been his nature to, when I'm grieving, I think anger is the emotion that's difficult for me. Sadness seems to be the emotion that's difficult for him. And so in the past, when I've been sad, he's wanted to try to help manage or fix or problem solve that.
Mm-hmm.
And he just knows he can't now. And so I'm noticing feeling validated and able to articulate that and able to give that back in new ways. And so just noticing those kinds of things, noticing that, the things that do feel really important and the things that don't, and noticing. So just before this, we had our kitchen had to be redone because they found black mold. And so we were doing all of that in between all of this. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of attachment to wanting things to be a certain way, and saw my impulse to want to control and manage that come up really heavily, and noticing there's softening there. And I have the capacity to soften around that and notice it might not matter that much. So it's just going in and out of noticing my own attachments and noticing what is here now, and moving in and out of both really profound stillness, acceptance, allowing a lot of space. Mm-hmm. And then what I noticed is, I think because of that, I was talking to a friend yesterday, and the question that comes into my mind is, I feel like, is this a healthy, I move in and out. And so there are moments that I feel like even now, 3 years ago, I would not have been able to have this conversation. I wouldn't have been able to breathe enough to have this conversation. I would have been weeping uncontrollably, probably the entire time. And now, even throughout this conversation, I know we all noticed that there were moments of tears coming up. Mm-hmm. And now there are moments I'm not. And I don't feel like I'm repressing. I feel like I'm just experiencing. And so there's questions about, am I doing it right? Mm. Is this healthy? Am I disassociating in some way? Am I, and I had a friend frame it to me differently and say, it's really remarkable to see you have this emotional flexibility to flow in and out with such apparent ease. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, that is true. That does feel like it is. And so reorienting to, I know that there's really no right or wrong. Mm-hmm. There's just, and so that's another thing I'm recognizing is my brain is wanting to figure out the right way to do it. And I'm just recognizing, oh, well, that's a habit of mine coming up, and there is no right. There's just noticing what is true for me in this moment and how do I support that. And so this is a lot of talking. Thank you for giving me the space to share that story, Ellen.
Yes.
But I think one of the questions that has come up that I think is worth exploring, and I have some thoughts about it, but I want to get your thoughts because I want to give you a chance to also share, is, I was talking to a client the other day about the experience of sadness, or not necessarily grief, but I think they're closely tied, not the same, but this idea of allowing yourself to feel and really being with the feeling and navigating. How do you know? Because I think there's a continuum here. But what's the difference between really allowing yourself to feel a feeling and sinking into depression? I have thoughts about that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, let's hold on that for sure. But I just want to say first, thank you for sharing and allowing me and all of our listeners into this personal moment in your life. I felt just grateful that I can be here with you and hear that story I felt as if, and maybe and others might have the same sense that, the vivid way you told the story and your emotions, and that we are it was in terms of storytelling, I felt like I was there with you in the retelling of it. So I just want to say thank you for that, for letting me experience that with you, because I think it's really special. And yes, I teared up several times too. I am, very empathetic, and I think a lot of folks are that might be able to relate to that. But so what was your question? It was about,
Yeah.
about wallowing, versus like letting it. And I think maybe that goes to your question too of like, am I like pushing this feeling away and I'm just, and am I really processing it, or am I justifying and doing? And so you said the words attachments and aversions. So just to bring up for everybody, an example of an attachment that you just mentioned was your attachment to do things right and do things correctly. So that's what comes up in your mind is, am I processing grief right? Like what, right? So that's like an example of an attachment that is like forward in your space right now. And then I think like maybe over time aversions, like you were saying that sadness is fine with you, but anger, is not. So if you are like if ever anyone's gonna, I don't remember, you worded it so much better, but I'm thinking of like stuffing your feelings. Like that's like one way to talk about like if you're not addressing some of the feelings, like would you have any anger there that you're not processing? Because that's what you said. That's an aversion, right? Like you already said that's an aversion. So just touching on that attraction aversion. That if there is any anger, because like if thinking about sadness versus like depression, and I think about grief, I kind of maybe even want to open up the question even more to what I think about a special thing of grief when a loved one passes away is this nuance in human experience that we don't get to experience very often because it doesn't seem real. Like Claire passing, and is she in her body? Is she not in her body? Her body's like leaving. Where is my attachment? Like, and our logical centers are trying to, process this physical being as we know it. But we know we're like physical beings and we're non-physical beings at the same time. And that's kind of some of your storytelling about the bird, the crow and the bird, and, that possibly, or like, and then the light that Claire is going to be present. There wasn't possibly a leaving in your heart that you said you didn't feel, you thought you'd feel that leaving. But if she's that non-physical being of her, obviously, is you. It is that connection.
Yeah.
But I think the magical thing about both birth and death is there's this unexplainable thing, because as I had 2 children, and when they all of a sudden were there and they weren't there before, it's like the same thing, but you're like experiencing the opposite. They were here and then they're not.
Right.
And it's the same with a birth, is like they're not here, but now they're here, and you're just like, your brain just cannot like process because it seems like magic. Like you're just like, what is happening? So I wonder, like in grief, and grief is a solitary emotion that's like solid, is kind of how we're talking about it. But I don't think any emotion is a solid, in how I'm hearing you, like your friends, like noticing that you're riding the wave of it and you're flexible emotional flexibility. I like that term that you used, or she used, because I think it's like, and maybe, like, do you always have to be sad? I've talked about this with other clients I've had that have had other loved ones die or in this deep grief that is unexplainable. It is nothing you can do to help. Like you said, your partner was acknowledging, and like you felt good that they were like finally realizing that there's nothing you can do except for to be with it. I mean, there is something, like you said, choices that you could push it away and be angry or do something else to avoid the feeling. But I think feeling is a grief, like it's like it can ebb and flow, and love is in there, like you said, that like love and grief coexisting. And in the very beginning of the call, you said, my heart is open now, and so but it lets the grief out more. And so the love and grief and how it's all together. And when like horrible things are happening around the world and there's heavy grief going on, I heard this thing of like, it was from a grief counselor who said like, you can hold the two simultaneously. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And how can we as humans in this modern society, because we're trying to be like, like feeling like we only need to feel one thing at a time and it needs to somehow be static and tangible, when really emotions are like an emotional stew, is how I explain it as a visual. That there's like, it's a stew of things melding around in the pot, and sometimes it gets bigger or smaller, but there's all these other things present. So I just want to bring it back to presence, because it sounds like being present. Because I was like, what was the thing 3 years ago that what you would have cried and cried versus now? And, you know, you mentioned a lot of other things you're pulling in and things you're contemplating and your tools you've learned to sit with. And, but all of it had to do with the present moment of being aware of what's present being present with your partner in the grief, being present with Claire before she passed.
Yeah.
So like, how can presence in the difference between sadness and grief, you know, like in sadness being depression, if that was like going back to your question of where does this all live together and what's the difference? Was that your, like the contemplation of like,
just how do you differentiate when you're just processing sadness or grief, or allowing yourself to experience those feelings, to feel those feelings, versus, okay, now I'm stuck in this feeling and now it's depression.
Yeah. So it's, you know, I think we've talked about this before, being subject or object. It's a coaching move that, you know, when people are feeling like it is them, then you're being subjected to it and the victim of, and you have no control.
Yeah.
And when you add a little bit of objectivity, which is usually done through a perspective shift or one way or another, and sometimes it's our logical mind going, I know her body's gone, and I know, you know, like thinking about, you know, reaching for things. But I think that's still back to the present moment of supporting us by becoming present. It brings, that's another perspective shift, that things become more objective, that you can like feel the sensation in your body. And you can label it like, oh, my chest feels really tight. Like when you were talking, there's times where my chest, like I stopped breathing and my chest felt tight. And then other times where I just like, there was a release of like, oh, like, and the love kind of poured out, you know, and then I felt a release in my chest. And I think that sounds like some of what you were going through, of being present and observing yourself in a way where then it doesn't become you, like the depression can... I have been depressed and I know what that feels like. And for me, it is like, you know, that happening to me and I feel like closed in. And so then there's no connection, but you were still connecting with your partner. So there was still, maybe it's back to your love and connection you were talking about, that your strengths. Because with love, like you stay connected. And when you're connected, your nervous system can't shut down into depression.
Yeah, I think those are important points. And I think you're nailing the nail on the head here, is that I think it is that I'm allowing myself to, because I'm allowing myself to feel, and this both and. So I'm feeling the sadness and the loss and recognizing the love and the gratitude and everything that I'm taking from, or that I've gotten.
Yeah.
And so I think that can be hard to hold both. And in my experience, what I notice is, as we might try to push down or deny or push away the sadness or the anger or whatever that uncomfortable feeling is, it baffles our access to the love part too. And it feels to me that might be where you get stuck, because it does become more difficult to connect. You do then start to grieve in isolation, and then it's harder to get out of. That's my experience of it. So it seems like the other impulse that I notice is that I notice that there's an impulse to want to be attached to the grief, to the sadness. Like that was my last experience of her, was feeling profoundly sad.
Yeah.
And so there's an impulse to say, if I let go of that sadness, then I'm letting go of the last thread of connection I have to her.
Yeah.
So recognizing that thought and recognizing it's not true.
Yeah.
The love that I have for her, the connection I have for her, to her, cannot be, it's knitted into my heart in a way that my heart is new and different now and can't be undone. And so that's something that I guess has also been a strength for me, is that I in the process of going through our coach certification process, I came to the idea of like seeing this connectedness stuff that I just talked about here with Claire, but I saw a lot of that in that process too. And recognizing that I can trust myself. I can trust where I am on my path. I can trust the universe or the mystery or God or however you want to say, you know, the thing that we can't touch or name that underlies all of consciousness. I can trust that that is in support of me.
Yeah.
And that I have what I need in this moment to meet what is in front of me. I will get where I am going. I can trust myself. I can trust this process. I can trust the universe. And so those little reminders, I think, have also been one of the things that have helped me not get stuck in the depressive part of it, where I feel hope. I think that's part of it too, is feeling hopeless, feeling like powerless.
Yeah.
Which I don't feel powerless. I feel very profoundly sad.
Yeah.
But not powerless, not victim to in some way this thing.
So we're starting to bump up against the end of time before we move into transition. But if you're watching this on video, I held up my two hands as if like it's a weight, grief and love, like this. That's how it was kind of presented by that grief therapist. It was like, can we hold them both in each hand? But the visual that I'm getting is more like, so you have this profound sadness and profound grief, and imagine it's like an avocado pit or something, you know, like it's hard and it's here. And what would it feel like if you surrounded that with love? Like a circle of love. Going with the avocado, the part that you eat is surrounding that. And so grief your sadness and your grief, even if anyone is experiencing grief in isolation, where like no one, if anyone's in a situation where you feel like you don't have a partner like you do, Rosela, where there's like understanding, or when you're processing this on your own, how can you wrap your love around that pocket of sadness or grief?
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful transition point, because that kind of leads into the practice that I was going to offer.
Great. Are we ready to transition? That was it went by so fast. It was so rich. We might have to continue next time. We'll see.
Yeah.
I think that was the tip of the iceberg there.
I think it was. I think it was the tip of the iceberg, and maybe not grief head on, but I think there are tangential things that I wanted to talk about, that we have wanted to talk about, that are related, that I think would be helpful to talk about next time. So
okay,
come back for that. In the meantime, I'd love to invite you all into practice. And so this is something, if you're driving, it might be difficult to do, but if you're somewhere that you can be still for a moment, I'm going to invite you to get nice and comfy in your chair or standing wherever you are, and just let yourself sink into the weight of your body, and take a nice deep breath. Let yourself relax. And I'd love to start this by inviting you to make that fist that Ellen was talking about. Take your non-dominant hand, make that fist that Ellen was talking about. And if you're processing grief, you can think about that as grief, or you can think about it as any habit or feeling that you are trying to shift or change or resist. And make that fist as tight as you can. And so that's your non-dominant hand's job, is to keep that fist tightly locked. And now take your dominant hand and try to pry it open. And I want each hand to do its job the best it can. So the non-dominant is really trying to stay closed, and the dominant is really trying to pry open. And just notice, as you're trying to pry, see if you can get in between or pull fingers apart. Notice what you're experiencing. Notice what each hand is physically feeling. Notice what your whole being is feeling as you try to pry. Notice how successful it is. And then give yourself a moment to just shake that off. Shake both hands. Get the blood flowing back into them. Let them feel good. Stretch if you need. Take a deep breath. And now I'll invite you to again make that same fist with that same hand. Again, make it that fist's job to stay closed. This time, allow your dominant hand to just enclose that fist. Maybe give it a little bit of a gentle squeeze, offering that fist a little support in its closing. Noticing what you feel. In your hands. Noticing how the comfort level compares, how the stuckness or resistance compares, what it feels like to that non-dominant hand to feel this support, what it feels like to the dominant hand to not be struggling so much to pry and resist. And so when you're ready, you can let those hands go and just hold on to that idea or that feeling in your body. And if it's helpful and comfortable, I'll invite you to close your eyes for just a moment. And again, come into your breath and your body. And I'll invite you to imagine yourself in a space, in a home, in a room that is you. Not necessarily your current home or your dream home, but a space that feels like you. It has the colors that bring you joy or comfort. It has the style of decoration that feels like home, feels like the energy of your spirit. And find yourself relaxing in your favorite place in this room, in this home, in the place that makes you feel the most supported, the most comforted, the most at ease, the most at home. Noticing what it feels like in your body to be in this space right now. What sensations you're experiencing, what places in your body you're aware of, thoughts that are drifting through, notice them and let them float. Emotions that are arising. And now I want you to notice that there's a knock on the door. And as you go to open the door, whatever was in that non-dominant hand is standing there. That thing that you were feeling like you wanted to resist, push away, shift. And I'm going to encourage you to notice how it feels to be standing in the presence of this thing. And if possible, I'm going to encourage you to invite it to come in for just a moment. And notice how that invitation felt to you. And as you go and sit back in your comfy favorite spot, notice if you've invited this thing to come sit next to you for a moment, how does it feel to have this energy in your home with you? What's different in your body right now? If you decline to invite it in, how does it feel to have it standing at the door? Is the door still open? Do you see it there? Have you shut the door completely? Whatever you've done, just notice how it feels now. Maybe even, if possible, extending your hands, palms face up, as though you're receiving a gift from this being. And just let yourself feel what that feels like. And when you've had your fill, when you feel ready, go ahead and thank this being, if that feels right, or politely show them to the door, or just let this go. Again, noticing what it feels like now, after having had this being enter your space in whatever way it did, and then depart. What are you noticing in your body now? What are you noticing in your emotions, in your thoughts? Just noticing without attachment and letting each awareness arise and fall. And when you're ready, bring your attention back to the current room you're in and go ahead and open your eyes and bring your awareness back to this moment. And with that, we are complete.
Thanks for listening. We want to hear from you. Drop us a comment on what you'd like to hear more about or questions you may have. We value your input and we'll work those topics into future episodes.
If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others. Like, subscribe, and leave a rating and review. It would go a long way in helping us spread the word about the Presence Hour podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.